My boyfriend and his group of close friends thought it would be funny to leave me stranded in a small town in the middle of the Nevada desert after a minor argument. Logan laughed as he slammed the car door, his voice ringing with glee in the dry, stifling air. The CV sped away, its tires kicking up a cloud of red dust on the gravel road. I stood there, still in mid-sentence, my protest stuck in my throat as the car disappeared behind rusted utility poles and the tattered gas station sign at the end of town. The last sound I heard from my so-called travel companions was a peal of laughter coming from the open window. I couldn't believe what had just happened. We were on a cross-state road trip a plan Logan had said was to reconnect after a busy day. But from the start, I felt like an extra at a reunion between Logan and his college buddies, all 30-somethings who acted like they were 21. They called me the proctor behind my back, thinking I couldn't hear. Every time I suggested stopping for a break or a meal on time, they would give me a bored look. Logan would just smile, always saying, "Don't ruin the mood." That afternoon, at a small roadside diner in a dusty, nameless town, I gently asked Logan not to order any more beer. He had had too much to drink since morning, and I didn't want to drive alone through the deserted stretch of road ahead. But I didn't expect that just a simple reminder would spark an argument. Logan growled, his face red not from the sun but from pride. One of his friends, I think his name was Rick, laughed loudly and said, "Is he always being controlled like that?" Logan didn't reply, just stood up and walked out, me following, still thinking I could placate him like always. I remember Logan's eyes clearly drunk but bright with anger. "Who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" he said, his voice choked. "You have your passport in your wallet, you have money. If you're so good, take care of yourself." Then he got in the car, started the engine, and without anyone telling him to, all his friends climbed in. No one looked at me one last time. No one asked if I was okay. Logan looked straight through me, as if I were air. The car roared to life and sped away, leaving me in the sweltering heat, a long shadow on the cracked ground, and the tinkling of wind chimes from the gift shop across the street. I stood there for at least 10 minutes, hoping they'd come back, that it was all a crazy prank, a silly stunt to scare me. But sweat was starting to trickle down my back, and the creaking of the shop's fan only made the reality more clear. Logan didn't come back. They'd really abandoned me in the middle of a barren town, with no Ubers, no cabs, no acquaintances. My wallet contained only $90 in cash. My cards, my ID, even my phone, all in the backpack Logan had let me hold onto so it's not too heavy when we'd left the car at noon. I don't even remember the exact name of the town, only that it was nearly 100 miles from the next stop, and that there were no buses that day. I walked into the roadside convenience store, where the air conditioner was whining like it was dying. The woman behind the counter in her 60s looked me up and down as if trying to sort me out, lost customer or runaway. "There's no rental car here," she said before I could even open my mouth. I nodded, borrowed the landline, and called Logan. 1, 2, 3 calls. All went straight to voicemail. I tried Rick. Then Vince. Then the other person whose name I couldn't remember, someone in the car. No answer. Worse, my number was blocked. They blocked me. All of them. I walked out of the store, unable to remember what I felt, angry, hurt, or just numb. The sun was starting to set, and my shadow stretched like ink on the sun-burned ground. "They'll be back. Just a threat," I whispered. But inside me, the hollowness had begun to grow slowly, surely like a hole I had no way to patch. Logan hadn't just abandoned me. He'd done it with the approval, even encouragement, of his so-called brothers. And I had no one. I left the grocery store as the sun was low, casting red streaks of light on the tin roof and the broken billboard of the bakery across the street. No one called back. No one turned around. The borrowed landline phone had gone completely silent, as if the world had locked me out. I sat on the old wooden bench in front of the shop, my eyes fixed on the horizon, where the dust Logan and his friends had left behind had long since dissipated. The harsh afternoon sun still lingered on my skin, but it wasn't the weather that made me shiver, it was the hollow feeling in my chest that grew more pronounced with each passing minute. I don't remember how long I sat there, only that when I stood up, my head was as heavy as a rock, my throat was dry, and my steps were unsteady as if I were in a dream. I started walking along the main street, the only light from the few shops that were still open. At the end of the street, a rotten wooden sign reading Desert Inn, vacancy flickered in the yellow light. I entered, the doorbell rang dryly, and a gray-haired woman appeared behind the counter, still clutching a magazine. I need a room for the night," I said, my voice hoarse. She looked at me for a long moment, not hostile, just appraising, then nodded, handing me a registration form. Room 6, ground floor, above the closed donut shop. The smell of fried onions and old oil still lingered in the hallway as I trudged toward the door. I opened my wallet, only $87. The landlady took $45 for the night, handing me a key with a wire clasp. I didn't know if this was a wise choice, but I had no choice. The room was tiny, low-ceilinged and dark, with a battered single bed with a dark brown sheet and a ceiling fan that made a faint whistling sound when it spun. The sink was in the corner, the faucet small and clanking when turned on. I looked at myself in the dull mirror above the sink, my hair tangled, my lips chapped, my eyes dark, and I didn't look like myself at all. The white t-shirt I'd worn that morning was stained with red dust and sweat, and my jeans were so crumpled that if my mother saw me, she'd think I'd escaped from the camp. I put my phone down on the bed, the only thing I had left, no SIM, no internet, no anything, and sat down, head in my hands. The tears didn't come as I expected. Instead, a cold numbness seeped into every fiber of my being. I spent the first night in a semi-conscious state, occasionally awakened by the sound of a passing truck or a cat meowing outside my window. The next morning, I walked to the bakery just down the street to buy a bagel and coffee, a $4.75 breakfast, leaving me with just over $30. I started calculating things, $45 a night for lodging, the cheapest meal around $5–10. I could last 2, maybe 3 days if nothing came up. Every time I went out, I walked along the main road, looked at the shops, asked around to see if there was a car passing through the big city. Everyone shook their heads, their eyes full of concern. There were no bus stops, no major gas stations, and certainly no one was going to Los Angeles or Las Vegas in the middle of the week. On the second night, I curled up in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of my mother. "See? I told you Logan was unreliable from the start," she would say. But I couldn't call her. I couldn't face the disappointment, couldn't explain that her daughter, a design scholarship winner, a promising contract with a Chicago furniture company, was now lying in a cheap motel room in the desert, with no wallet, no internet, and not a soul knowing where she was. On the third morning, I stared at my hands, slender, once meticulously manicured, every 2 weeks now chapped from the sun and dust. On my ring finger was the faint imprint of the ring I always wore. The ring Logan had given me for our 3rd anniversary, the one I had thought would symbolize everlasting love. I took it off, for the first time since I got it. It felt light. The pawn shop was 4 blocks from the motel, the red sign faded by the sun. The owner was a bald man, not much to say, just looked at the ring under a magnifying glass and gave me a number. It's much less than it was worth, I knew it, but I didn't have the energy to haggle. I left with a few $100s in my wallet and an unnameable void in my chest. I sat on a bench in front of the old bus station, the only place with an electronic schedule. A bus was leaving town at 6 p.m., heading east. I could choose my destination, I could choose, for the first time in years. I opened the map, ran my hand along the state line. The town where my family lived was only a few hours away. I could go home, talk it all out, start over in the arms of family. But just thinking about it made me freeze. Family meant explaining. It's the pity in my eyes. It's the questions I don't want to answer. I don't want to go back to the place where people saw me shine, only to see me broken. I didn't want to be the girl left in the desert by her drunk boyfriend, whispered behind me. I looked up at the dashboard. There was another bus heading north, over the mountains, to a small town in Colorado I'd never heard of. No friends, no family, no one expecting me. And maybe that was what I needed. I bought a ticket, and as the sky darkened over the desert wasteland, I climbed aboard, sitting in the back row, clutching my small backpack to my chest. I didn't know what lay ahead, but at least this time, the choice was mine. The bus left town just as dusk fell, traveling miles of empty roads, past lonely power poles and cracked, deserted land. I sat by the window, my head pressed against the cool glass, watching the stars emerge against the dark sky. The bus stopped several times during the night to pick up or drop off passengers, but I didn't move from my seat. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, just sat still, letting the movement of the car and the steady rolling sound of the wheels on the road lull the fear inside me. In the morning, the first sunlight through the window woke me up with a slight headache. I had arrived in Colorado, a strange land, a town I couldn't even pronounce, but I knew it was the end of this bus trip, and the beginning of something new. When I got off the bus, my legs numb from sitting for so long, I had only a small backpack, a half-full bottle of water, and less than $200 in my wallet. No plans, no destination, no one waiting. The air was different, drier, but cooler than the desert heat. The heady scent of hay, pine, and wildflowers drifted in the wind, making me feel as if I had just entered a completely different world. I started walking, not knowing where to go, just leaving that tiny bus stop as if someone would call me back, tell me this trip was a mistake. I walked along a dirt road that wound through low hills, flanked by vast fields and wind-bleached wooden fences. At first I was enthusiastic, but after a few miles, hunger began to grip my stomach, and my feet felt like they were digging deeper into the gravel. My old sneakers weren't meant for hiking, and my heels were burning. The sun climbed higher, casting a brief shadow on the sunburned road. I drank the last of my water just after noon, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I thought I just needed to walk a little further, and I would find a house, a restaurant, anything. But there was nothing, just the dry wind and the distant trees blurred by the sunlight. I don't remember the moment my body collapsed, only that my legs wouldn't listen, and the world tilted at an angle. The gray ground rushed in, hitting my cheeks with a pleasant coldness. Before I closed my eyes, I had time to think, maybe this is what a runaway with no direction, no purpose like me deserved. The first voice I heard after that was a woman's. All worried and decisive. "Hey, sweet girl, open your eyes. You're all right, you're okay." A pair of warm, rough hands turned me over and patted my cheeks. I tried to open my eyes, and the first thing I saw was an elderly woman's face, silver hair tied back at the nape of her neck, tan skin, and determined eyes. Next to her, a tall, middle-aged man stood with his arms crossed, his expression stern but not cold. They took me to their house, a simple wooden house in the middle of a valley, surrounded by low hedges and flowering almond trees. Her name was Margaret, her husband Walter. They didn't ask too many questions, nor did they seem suspicious. Margaret made me a cup of ginger tea and handed me a bowl of hot soup whose taste I still remember. Nothing fancy, just potatoes, carrots, some herbs, and a touch of lemon. But it was the first meal I'd had in days. I slept in the living room, which had a squeaky old sofa, but it was soft and clean. The next morning I woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of baking bread wafting from the kitchen. I thought about leaving, but when I went downstairs and saw Margaret hanging towels out in the yard, I sat down at the table, let her pour me more tea, and didn't say goodbye. Over the next few days I started helping them. At first it was just folding towels, watering the plants, then gradually sweeping the chicken coop, picking vegetables, and clearing the weeds around the fence. Walter didn't talk much, but pointed very specifically. Margaret talked softly, sometimes humming softly as she worked. I didn't realize when I had become accustomed to manual labor only that my body, accustomed to keyboards and espresso, began to obey. The first blisters on my hands made me wince, but then my skin thickened, my legs grew stronger, and sleep came more easily. I never thought I would find peace in a foreign place, with two people who owed me nothing. But every afternoon sitting on the wooden chair on the porch, watching Margaret knitting and Walter mowing the lawn with his slow pace, I began to understand. Sometimes it is the strangeness that brings the best things. I was no longer the girl abandoned in the desert. I began to be myself, a useful person, learning, contributing to the rhythm of life in a small, peaceful place. And that, to me, was the beginning of something more precious than any promise I had ever heard. I don't remember the exact moment that marked the turning point, but one morning, as Margaret and I were hanging dried lavender in the attic, she turned to me, smiled, and said, "You work like this is home." And strangely enough, I didn't deny it. Because somehow the quiet days in the fields, the afternoons washing my hands under the cold tap after weeding, and the nights eating cornflakes on the porch had made this place part of my life. I was no longer a guest sleeping on the sofa. I was part of the rhythm of life here. One evening, as I was folding the handmade soap wrappers Margaret had shown me, she put her hand on mine and told me that the following week was the village market. "Come with me," she said, her voice as light as the wind through the fields. "Let's sell some essential oils and some almond cookies. Things you can make." I paused for a moment, not because I was embarrassed, but because my heart was beating abnormally fast. Sell things I made myself? The thought was both foreign and unnerving. As if someone had taken me back to the time when I had dreamed of starting my own brand before Logan had dashed that dream with words like "that won't feed anyone." Early that morning, I wore the burlap dress Margaret had lent me, carrying a basket of soap, a bouquet of dried flowers, and a few jars of honey that Walter had filmed the night before. The market was in the middle of the town square, where stalls were set up with wooden stands and white canvas roofs. Locals chattered while children ran around the wildflowers. I sat behind the table, head bowed, palms sweating as the first customers approached. Margaret sat next to me, calm as if she had been doing this all her life, which, in fact, she had. The first woman bought a bar of lavender soap I had wrapped just $1.50 and thanked me with an unbelievably warm look. As she turned away, I looked at the money in my hand and felt like I was holding something sacred. I had made it. With my own hands. No one told me to. No one was controlling, and someone had valued it enough to take their hard-earned money in return. It was my first income in years, not the money Logan left on the kitchen table as alms, not the credit card he controlled, not the reasonable spending he sent me at the beginning of the month. It was my own money, earned with my hands and my heart. I began to find my own rhythm. During the day, I helped Walter in the almond orchard, learning to test the soil, measure moisture, record my harvest in a notebook. In the afternoons, Margaret and I baked, made soaps, mixed herbs. In the evenings, I sat alone on the porch, rewriting recipes, sketching packaging ideas, memorizing each step as if it were my own work. No one asked, no one expected, but I did it because I wanted to. And for the first time in years, I didn't do it to please anyone. Just to make myself feel alive. One day after dinner, Walter called me into the back garden, where he was watering the lavender seedlings. "Margaret says you're great," he began, not looking at me, still steadily sprinkling water. "You know, our daughter's in Oregon now. She's married, with 2 kids. She's not coming back." I said nothing. He looked up, looked at me for the first time and said, "This farm needs someone to take care of it. Someone who's really committed. Not blood, just trust." I didn't know what to say. No thank you was enough. I just nodded, just a small nod, but he understood. From then on, everything changed. No noise, no ceremony. It was just more specific instructions from Walter, questions like, "Where do you think we should plant more?" From Margaret. They let me keep a ledger, discuss quantities to market, even experiment with new soap scents. I began to have a voice. Not because someone else gave up my place, but because I actually worked to earn it. I never thought I would learn to believe in myself again, to believe that I could build something from scratch, especially after all those years in the shadow of a man who told me it's good to be creative, but don't waste your time on crafting nonsense. But it turned out that it was from that nonsense that I had woven my life back strand by strand, knot by knot, until when I looked back, I no longer recognized the woman who had been left in the desert. I thought I had closed the door on my past, bolted it tightly, and covered it with the peaceful rhythm of life in the valley. Sun-drenched mornings, the sound of roosters crowing from the back barn, afternoons taking cakes to the market, evenings sitting with Margaret learning to knit scarves while Walter quietly fixed the old barn hinges. I never thought of Logan. Not because I was trying to avoid it, but because there was nothing else worth remembering. So when the strange engine noise came at noon, while I was out in the garden checking the newly planted lavender beds, I didn't think of him at all. Until the silver car pulled up at the head of the dirt drive and the door opened, revealing a familiar figure with a white shirt pressed flat and hair gelled so carefully it was almost comical in the dry, dusty sun of the farm. Logan. He stepped out of the car as if he were preparing for a meeting, his eyes scanning the scene around the house with the disbelief and disgust I was so used to. I stood still in the lavender field, still holding my notebook, my heart not a ripple. The strangest thing wasn't that he had found me, but that I no longer felt anything but a strange, cold calm. When he turned around and saw me, his eyes were filled with surprise. I knew what he saw: long hair that had been carefully curled now held back with a rubber band, tanned skin, dirt-stained arms, faded jeans and t-shirt. No makeup, no high heels. There was no trace of the woman who had stood beside him at cocktail parties and client conferences. "Jesus, Alexis," he blurted, his voice wavering between shock and contempt. "What is this about?" I stepped closer, unhurried. "What are you doing here, Logan?" "I came to take you home," he said, as if that still mattered. This game of getting away has gone on long enough, don't you think? You taught me a lesson, all right. But now let's go home. I looked him straight in the eye. "You think this is a game?" He shrugged, the smile fading. "You disappeared off the map. You didn't answer to anyone. You know what people said? That you were kidnapped, or that you were crazy. You made a mess of things." "What about you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "What did you tell them? That you abandoned me in the desert because I told you not to drink any more beer? That your friends laughed as the car sped away, leaving me with exactly $87 in my wallet?" His face hardened. I apologized. I said I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. "But you left. You ran away. You think that's maturity?" "No," I said, pulling the envelope I'd prepared from my pocket. "Maturity is knowing the limits of forgiveness, knowing when to walk away to save yourself." I placed the envelope in his hands. "Here are the divorce papers, witnessed by a local attorney. I've signed them." Logan didn't touch the envelope. He just looked at it like it was something dirty, like if he didn't touch it, it would disappear. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious in my life," I said. "The life I have here, it's not glamorous, it's not high class, but it's real. It's free, it's what I make of it. Here, I don't have to ask anyone's permission to spend the money I earn. I don't have to fit into a mold you drew and call it love." He sneered, shaking his head. "How long do you think growing weeds and making soap will sustain you? You're wasting your future." I looked at him, really looking at him for the first time, not through the eyes of an ex, but through the eyes of a stranger, and I saw clearly, Logan hadn't changed. He still thought he was the center of the universe, still believed that there was only one path to success, and it was the path he had chosen for both of us. He didn't come to apologize. He came to pull me back into the mold, and what he didn't know was that the mold had long since broken. "Logan," I said, my voice as calm as water in the wind, "I don't need you, and I don't want to be anywhere you call home. This is my home. The people here are my family. And you're just a lesson." He stood still, the envelope still in his hand, his face pale with anger and hurt. But I didn't flinch. I'd been small in his shadow for too long. Now I stood tall in the middle of the fragrant lavender, the sun shining down on my dirty sleeves, and I knew there was nothing in his eyes that could make me shrink back. Logan left without a word. No apology, no plea, no look back. And when the sound of his car disappeared behind the trees, I saw Margaret standing in the doorway, her eyes watching me silently. She didn't ask anything, just nodded slightly as if she'd been waiting for it. I walked up the steps, took off my gloves, and smiled at her. "I'm home," I said, and for the first time in years, I actually meant what I said. Logan left as the sun sank behind the mountains, leaving behind the stillness of a slow afternoon in the valley. I stood watching his car until it was just a speck in the dust of the dirt road. There was no apology, no look back, no sign that he really understood what had happened. But I didn't need him to, because in that moment I knew I had taken back what he had silently taken away. Not money, not fame, not stability, but choice. For the first time in years, I was the one who decided where I would go next. I went back to work the next morning without a moment's hesitation. The plant still needed watering, the bread still had to be baked, the customers would still come to the market on the weekend. Walter showed me how to tie the newly harvested lavender, and Margaret asked me to weigh the soap that was about to be packaged. Everything went on as if no one had interfered, as if Logan had been a stray gust of wind passing through the familiar rhythms of life here. But I was different. I had changed. There is no longer any part of me that doubts myself, no longer any barrier between me and the future I am slowly creating. In this peaceful farm, I not only found a home, but also found myself, the woman I had lost amid the compromises, the nods to keep things quiet, and the silences for fear of upsetting others. Every morning, when I wake up, I step out onto the porch, take a deep breath of the cool mountain air, listen to the sounds of chickens, insects, and the wind rustling through the leaves. I start my day with work, Sometimes hard, sometimes messy, but never meaningless. The money I earned from each bar of soap, each bottle of honey, each bundle of herbs is the clearest confirmation that I no longer depend on anyone. The community here, from the market vendors to the baker, the old man growing apples, the retired teacher, no one cares where I come from or who I used to be. They only care about who I am now. They called me by name, asked me questions, laughed when I told stories, and invited me to small gatherings without any need for dress or pretense. And it was from a cruel act, an unexpected turn on a seemingly predetermined path, that I was reborn. Logan thought that by abandoning me in the desert, I would collapse, come back to him, learn the reasonable lesson he thought I needed. But what he never expected was that, in that barren desert, I found my own water. I didn't just survive, I grew, stronger, wiser, and most of all, I was free. Free from toxic relationships, from judgmental eyes, from the pressure to please everyone but myself. If you're watching this and you're in a relationship that makes you feel small, makes you doubt yourself, makes you ask for permission to live the way you want, I want you to know you deserve more. You don't need a shock to change, but if it happens, you can absolutely turn it into an opportunity, a chance to start over, to go in the opposite direction, to choose a new life, even if that means starting over from scratch. I'm not saying this journey is easy, it's not a fairy tale, but I can tell you for sure, there is nothing sweeter than being yourself, in a place where you don't have to ask permission to be you. Thank you for following my story this far. If you find yourself anywhere along this journey, even just a little, I hope you'll remember that rebirth doesn't require magic. It just requires a first step, a courageous choice. And if you want to continue reading about rebirth, female empowerment, and the journey of finding yourself after heartbreak, don't forget to subscribe. Not only will it help me tell more stories like this, but it will also help spread the message that no one should have to stay where they're not valued. You deserve to live a life that matters, and if I can do it, so can you.